we talked a lot about like, again, the mechanics of how do I do the work, but then there's the whole motion around, broadly speaking, account management. Like, how do we make sure that we are delivering and delighting our customers, and how are we viewing that, monitoring that, managing that, whatever. And you've got this really cool, you showed this to me like a couple of days ago, and I loved it. It was a really cool view for me as like, me as an executive, also me as a head of delivery, to just see at a glance, where are we? How are we doing? Where am I worried? Right? Where are my risks? And so I guess maybe what I would say, Gray, is like, walk us through this view here and maybe spend a couple of seconds on each one, particularly the health score. Health score probably requires the most explanation. Like, tell me, what is the health score? Like, how do I develop it? Who does that? What that like, and then NPS, for those that are less familiar, spend a little time on that too. But anyways, give us an overview of this.
Yeah. So this ties into a couple of questions that people had earlier, which is like, hey, what are the metrics I should be looking at and managing across my projects and team?
Yeah.
So we can talk about those. We talked about some of the financial pieces, your utilization, your margin, your profitability by client, by service line, by team. We talk about velocity rate and some of the leading indicators of how we're executing on work as an internal team.
Yep.
But the single most important metric for most teams around retaining their clients is like, what's the health and creating more referrals and the positive flywheel that we all want, is what's the health of our clients. And so you got a handful of different variations that people will use. Some folks will go crazy and they've got the 1 to 10 score of how clients are doing. Some folks will use like the traffic light system, red, yellow, green.
Yeah.
And probably my favorite variation is the 1 to 5 matrix. And this is, in this case, this simple example of it, this is purely an internal grade. And so it's standardized for the team. A 5 means, so scale of 1 to 5, how healthy is the client? 5 means, hey, we've got a goal over here. We're supposed to increase their pipeline by 25%. We are at or above that, and we're continuing to trend up. Has to be part of it. So that's the performance side. The other side is the relationship side. Yeah. So from a relationship level, if I call up Ryan today and say, hey, I've got somebody who's thinking about working with us. They're in a business like yours. They're not really sure, would you be willing to speak to them on our behalf? They're the person who like can hardly let you finish. Like, I would love to have that conversation. And like, I've got all kinds of glowing things. I'd happily leave you a testimonial or refer people over today in the right situation. That's a 5. The flip side is like, hey, we're not hitting target. We're continuing to trend down and the client is pissed. And you've got gradations of that along this scale. So standardizing that becomes super important for your team, because how you're going to use this score is in your weekly delivery team meeting or your meeting with your account managers that you have. Except for in a very, very small firm, you're not going to look at every single account every single week. What I'm looking for is places where someone's taken a turn down. There's a change in score week over week. And anybody who's a 3 or below will certainly make it onto the issues list. And we need to figure out, hey, what's happening? We're unlikely to retain or upsell or move this account if it continues to trend the way that it's trending right now.
Yeah. Well, let me ask. So real quick, so the health score, obviously has a component of, are we achieving what we set out to achieve? I love the objective stated out there, and that's a thing you can get to. But so I love that. Are we hitting that? And then there's an element of like, do they like us, right? Are we I like to, when I talk to our team, I say, I've got 3 questions to answer. Are they making money? That's their objective. Are we making money? That's our objective. And do they like us, right? Like, those are the 3 things that I care about. If these things are yes, I feel great. So, but I guess so the health score is a little bit of an overlap with some of what I would learn from an NPS as well, right? Like, some of that is also, so how would you view the 2 of those, like, working
playing together?
Yeah.
So I view them kind of as like calibrating, or the NPS score being a calibrator to client health. So NPS, for anyone who's not familiar, is the classic, scale 1 to 10. How likely are you to refer this business to a colleague or friend or whatever that might be? And so 9s and 10s are our promoters, 7s and 8s are passives, and then 6 and below are detractors. And we're measuring NPS by the percentage of people who are promoters minus the percentage of detractors. Anyways, that NPS score, I should never have somebody rated as a 5. Hey, they're so thrilled. But it turns out they're actually also a 5 on the MP, like they're
exactly. There's a disconnect.
So we need to keep,
I gotcha.
We need to keep our account managers accountable to Because if once account managers, project managers, whatever you call that role, strategists, once they know I don't have to discuss this and have this brought up in our weekly meeting, as long as it's a 4 or a 5 and not changing down, you're going to get a whole lot of 4s and 5s, most likely. I'd rather kick the can down the road in terms of having the hard conversations to fix this. And so we use a couple of things to try to calibrate that. One are rules like, hey, nobody should ever be churning other than, hey, COVID hit and there's some totally unrelated thing that happened here. Nobody should be churning if you've given them a 4 or a 5
totally
internally. Secondly, that NPS score helps calibrate. I'm able to see and kind of check their realism.
Yep.
And then lastly, I love having account managers do, depending on your retainer size or your deal value, either it's a consistent update at some specified frequency. So often this is weekly. The reality is if you've got somebody in there on a $1,500 a month retainer, there's not enough time and margin to go fill something out weekly. So you got to use some common sense around this. But asking, these are my favorite 4 kind of leading questions or prompting questions is, why would the customer be unhappy? So you've got to, it's not just, is the customer happy, but why would they be unhappy? You're looking, you have to train yourself to look for reasons that they're not happy. Are you personally, is our team happy with the account? Any changes in strategy or time on that I should know about? And then what do you need help with on this account is the prompt to do that. And then they'll typically confirm some other details in whatever system they wind up using for this.
This is great.
It gives you like a week over week or whatever that frequency is, week over week view of where did things change? And most of the time, the answer is, hey, there's probably some action coming out of this. Somebody needs help somewhere. But a lot of this stuff, we're just kind of able to check that health score and hold it in a little bit more. It's just an efficient way to manage kind of how is our portfolio of clients doing when you're leading what can be a pretty large delivery team with a lot of client projects going on at a time.
So a couple of super granular questions around the NPS specifically. So one question I have, which is, what would you recommend as the frequency of the NPS? And we had another question from the group, which was, are you doing that at the company level or like the project level? So how do you think about that?
Yeah, I would typically tie this to the specific deal. So think of that as the project level rather than a client. We've worked with teams who have like 9 different divisions of Nike as clients.
These are all different stakeholders. They have
and they're totally different.
Yeah, exactly.
Most of the time in the agency space, this is one and the same. The client is the deal, is the same thing.
Yeah.
And then the second question was how frequently for NPS. I think if you're running a decent sized retainer project, every 90 days is great. If you're running a really tight, intense branding project or web project or something, 90 days is like, hey, we might get 2 scores out of here. It's not frequent enough. So whether it's NPS or you're using a customer satisfaction survey or some other way to try to get that feedback, it's got to be more frequent, probably every 30 days. And then if you've got somebody, someone's a website hosting customer and you're charging them $50 a month, maybe you send this out, once a year, twice a year.
I'll tell you, I know I'm not the project management guru, but one thing that I do relative specific to NPS, because we use a version of NPS for our practice, but one thing that I do either in the kickoff call or one of the early onboarding calls is I will let them know, like, hey, one of the things that we do is we seek NPS, right? And so 90 days from now, I'm going to sit here and we're going to ask you the question, hey, how likely are you to recommend? I'm a 10 out of a 10 guy. I love 10 out of 10. And I'm very hopeful that you are also going to feel 10 out of 10. What would be true? Like, what must be true about this engagement? What would you be looking for? What does it feel like in order for you to put a 10 out of a 10? And I write that stuff down and I communicate whether, that's a key question. Cause it really, I'm a big alignment person, right?
Yeah.
And so the more we can be very explicit about alignment, we can write down these things are true and we're going to use that. We're going to work to that. We're going to set our output in the context of those things. And it's also just kind of a subtle psychological way of like
100%.
Making it a little bit easier for you to get the 10. So anyway,
can I ask one follow? This is a little bit of a tangent, but I want to I want to potentially make a point unless you give the wrong answer here. So no pressure with your answer. What do you most often, like you ask that question to me and you expect back the average answer. What's the average answer back? Is that if you had a bucket?
You were going to say, is that? It felt like I was going to have a multiple choice.
Well, so basically the two paths here are, is it kind of like, hey, I expect you to kind of deliver on everything you promised? Like if we just did that, that'd be great. Or is it, I also want this extra thing?
It's always the latter. There's always, I mean, at least for me, I generally feel like there's a thing that was unsaid.
Yeah.
And it, again, in our world, like you're going to come to us because you care a lot about accounting operations or you care a lot about advisory. There's like a tip of the spear here. There's a reason. One of them is a nice to have. And in branding and strategy and all those, they have their own kind of versions of those, right? And I will come in thinking, I think it's probably this. And a not trivial amount of the time, I realize it was actually something else. I think people are quite poor at describing specifically what they're looking for. And so when you phrase questions in different ways like this, you learn things that you didn't. So anyways, that's my experience. I don't know if that's
100%.
Okay, good.
So no, I think it's like the expectations piece. Is there some expectation, some blank that they had filled in somewhere that you wouldn't have gotten without a better question, but you were able to uncover, and that sets you up so much better in the delivery process.
Yeah. Awesome. Great.